All right, how is everyone doing today? And welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel. We try to check out great theories of everything, all-encompassing theories, grand unified theories, earth-shattering discoveries, magnum opuses and tour de forces from obscure sources. And in this case, the earth-shattering discoveries, this is the 189th video that we've done called the Reciprocal Church, where we're attempting to amass resources to help us in our transitions to the new religions that are, at least the new spiritualities that we're going to be needing as soon as we recognize that all of our spiritual scriptures are discredited, tampered with, psyops, and based on coded information, which just ultimately really isn't worth decoding, even though that's what I'm doing. So we went over many different kinds of New Testament codes, especially going through the Dead Sea Scrolls. A lot of the language that's used in the Dead Sea Scrolls is anticipating the language used in the Gospels. Also, today we're looking at the work of Josephus and comparing his work with the Gospels and also his story. Particular with the book of Luke, there is a long series of parallels between Josephus's book War of the Jews, really 7 books, and the book of Luke in particular, but really all of the Gospels, or at least the Synoptic Gospels. And what this adds up to is that the Gospels were written by Josephus and his team. And Josephus was not only an agent, but a member of the Roman Caesars of the Flavian dynasty in the late 1st century AD. And he was originally a Jew and was a commander in the Jewish army for their war against the Romans, their war to try to throw off the colonizing yoke of the Romans. Starting in 63 BC, the war started in 66 AD. All of that time between those two dates, the Jews were a big pain in the Romans' existence. They were always insurrecting. They were always making it difficult on the Romans. Not like you should be feeling sorry for the Romans, but you just need to understand their motives. And there was insurrection after insurrection. The Jews were very separatist, xenophobic. Their religion was monotheistic, and so they did not assimilate to the Roman Empire like many of the other kingdoms or whatever that the Romans incorporated into their empire, which was very, very large. And out of the hundreds of different groups that they had colonized, the Jews were the difficult ones, the most difficult ones. And so after they got done fighting this war against the Jews from 66 to 73 AD, and probably even before that, they figured out that maybe we should, do a little bit of intelligence work, do a little bit of a psyop here on the Jews by, instead of continuing to let them be violent and, hate and have hatred for the Romans, why don't we propose this guy Jesus, who is a Prince of Peace and who wants to walk a second mile with the Roman soldier's backpack, who wants to turn the other cheek, who wants to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. And the Romans had, obviously, the motive, they had the means, and they had the method. They did the exact same thing to the Jews to create rabbinical Judaism at exactly the same time, in exactly the same way, other than it wasn't Josephus, it was a guy named Ben Zakkai. And in both cases, they surrendered to the Romans. And then they gave Vespasian, who was the general, they gave him, when they surrendered, they gave him the star prophecy, saying, which is exclusively for Jews. But they gave it to the Roman Vespasian, who said that, I foresee that someday you're going to become the emperor. And then when Vespasian did become the emperor in 69 AD, he hooked them up, both of them. He gave a land grant to Ben Zakkai at Jaffna, and they set up a Jewish kind of academy there. And in the case of Josephus, who did the same thing, surrendered to Vespasian and gave him the star prophecy saying that I see that someday you're going to become the emperor and that God has changed his mind and now favors the Romans, not the Jews. So I defect. He defected, and he was paid back when Vespasian became emperor by Vespasian adopting him to his family and moving him to Rome, where he lived the rest of his life and wrote the books War of the Jews, 7 volumes, his autobiography, and also Antiquities of the Jews, which is 20 volumes. And that was from, say, 70 AD until he died in, I think, about 102 or something. And but Christians know Josephus because he is the only first century source that actually refers to Jesus by name and by event as a corroborating witness to Jesus, although not a witness. He wasn't there. He was talking about 30, 40 years before that, but corroborating at least secondhand evidence of the existence of Jesus, the only evidence that there is outside of the Gospels, and a few offhand comments in similarly situated classical works like that of Suetonius, Tacitus. These are all agents of the Roman Caesars. But we are going over the book of Luke and the parallels with War of the Jews. And there are long set, this is just scratching the surface, but this is mostly from the work of Joseph Atwill, his book Caesar's Messiah, especially the Flavian signature. The Flavians, that was the dynasty. Vespasian from 69 to 79 AD, his son Titus, 79 to 81 AD, and then Titus's brother Domitian, also Vespasian's son, from 81 to 96 AD. And Titus actually became the general to replace Vespasian when he became emperor. So the War of the Jews talks about both Vespasian and Titus being in charge of the Roman army. But in particular, when it's talking about Titus, it is as a replacement for Jesus, or a second coming of Jesus. all of the prophecies that Jesus makes in the Gospels and in Revelation are fulfilled by Titus in the War of the Jews, like, which is supposed to be a history. Now, scholars really believe that the War of the Jews actually happened, unlike the Gospels, which are more seen as being, not mythological, but partly true, but, a lot of contradictory information and, not terribly reliable, like as a, outright history. But Josephus is seen as more than that, although that is, I believe that's collapsing as well. Interestingly, Josephus' War of the Jews actually used to be part of the Bible for at least many sects up until the Middle Ages, and still is part of the Bible for the preterists sect. But what we're going over is a step-by-step parallel between the 3-year ministry of Jesus and the 3-year military campaign at Titus. Where Jesus goes, Titus goes. What Jesus does is paralleled by what Titus does. What Jesus predicts is fulfilled by Titus. But Jesus generally predicts it in a metaphorical, symbolic way, and Titus fulfills it in a macabre, realistic way. And so the Romans, not only are they trying to steer the Jews into this Prince of Peace, but at the same time they're mocking and, just kind of degrading the Jews at the same time. We looked a little bit at some of the work of Robert Eisenman and how you can just see all of the inserted anti-Semitic stuff that is within the book of Acts that is not necessarily in some of these other stories that are apocryphal. He showed that in the book of Acts, like in the first 7 chapters, Peter goes on anti-Semitic tirades like 6 different times and says, you killed the Messiah, which, that's how the Gospels read, but that makes very little sense to anybody who is kind of thinking about it. The Romans were the ones who were in control. And the Romans were the ones who hated the Jews. For Peter, who was supposed to be a Jew, to be like, bending over backwards to be berating the Jews and not the Romans, which is also the position that Jesus is taking in there. So the fingerprints of the Romans tampering with and or just composing the Gospels is kind of overwhelming. But then when we see all the parallels that Joseph Atwill's found, and then when we see all the parallels that Michael Menescott has found, it is, as many of the Anons say, how many examples do you need before it becomes statistically impossible that this is a real story, or that it's statistically impossible that these 2 stories are not related and not written by the same person. So anyway, we're going to look at the basic pattern here again. When Jesus, this is from Atwill, whenever Jesus is curing a, quote, sickness or exorcising a, quote, demon, he is paralleling Titus's removing of the, quote, demon of rebelliousness against Rome, in this case, the Jews, particularly John and Simon, who are, and then eventually Eleazar or Lazarus, who are kind of the 3 leading Romans, the 3 leading Jews kind of leading the rebellion, but then also kind of fighting against each other. But, we have this episode where Jo- Josephus is talking, this is in War of the Jews, book 7, chapter 8, although it's really referring to what's in book 4, because these parallels in the Bible, in the Gospel, book of Luke, and in the War of the Jews, they are in order. There's like 30 parallels, and they are in order. Like Luke 5 through 12 or something, 5 through 13, and the War of the Jews mostly in book 3 and 4. And they're in order. But he's referring to, you have to get this other information from book 7 before you can kind of put this into place, where he's talking about John as a, quote, demoniac, who, like the demoniac in the Gospels, unleashed thousands of demons into the countryside at other places, or into the countryside. And what Josephus says there is that, quote, John filled the entire countryside with 10,000 instances of wickedness. Now, if we go to the book of Luke, and we check out Luke 8, verse 26, he goes to the country of the Gadarenes, to Gadara, which is where this was all happening for Josephus as well, and which is opposite Galilee. And when he stepped out on the land, there met him a certain man from the city who had demons for a long time, and he wore no clothes, nor did he live in a house, but in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out, fell down before him, and with a loud voice said, What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me. For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man, for it had often seized him, and he was kept under guard, bound with chains and shackles. And he broke the bonds and was driven by the demon into the wilderness. Jesus asked him, saying, What is your name? And he said, Legion, because many demons had entered him. Yet were these men that now got together and joined in the conspiracy by parties. This is from War of the Jews. And so this is what Atwill, and I agree with this, although it's kind of a weak parallel, I think, but what Josephus, instead of saying legion, and again, remember that legion is specifically a term that the Romans used, the Roman legions, and a legion is a certain amount of troops in the army, Roman army. It varied over the years how many troops you were talking about, but in general, a low number of thousands, I believe. But in Josephus, he says, Yet were these men that now got together and joined in the conspiracy by parties, too small for an army and too many for a gang of thieves. So that is War of the Jews, book 4, chapter 7, paragraph 408. And then the next parallel is similar, or in the same story. And this goes to Luke, again, Luke 8, verse 31. And they begged him that he would not command them to go out into the abyss. Now a herd of many swine was feeding there on the mountain. So they begged him that he would permit them to enter them. And he, Jesus, permitted them. Then the demons went out of the man and entered the swine. Now you go to the parallel in War of the Jews, book 4, chapter 8. And now Vespasian sent Placidus against those that had fled from Gadara, with 500 horsemen and 3,000 footmen, while he returned himself to Caesarea with the rest of the army. But as soon as these fugitives saw the horsemen that pursued them just upon their backs, and before they came to a close fight, they ran together to a certain village, which was called Bethanabris, where, finding a great multitude of young men and arming them, partly by their own consent, partly by force, they rashly and suddenly assaulted Placidus and the troops that were with them. So, Atwill calls this parallel demons infect another group. So in both cases, the demon was sent out of the one individual and infected a group of thousands, or a large group. And then this next parallel is the herd ran violently. And it's just very short in Luke. Now, these different parallels are meant for the entertainment of the Romans, where they're making fun of the Jews. They beat the Jews in this war and basically put the Jews in slavery, and the Jews ended up building the Colosseum, basically. And, they looted the Jewish temple and turned the riches of the temple into the Colosseum. And, so some of the parallels are very obvious, but some of them you have to actually be looking for before you find them. Because there's so many of them, this is, Atwill imagines this as like a running secret amongst the court of the Caesars. It's like entertainment for them to go over all the Josephus's book and how he's mocking the Jews, and then eventually the Christians. And the joke is really, on the Christians at this point, because when the Christians believe that they're worshiping Jesus, they are actually worshiping Titus Caesar, because Titus Caesar is the person who's fulfilling all of the prophecies of the second coming from Jesus. So the herd ran violently. So Luke says, and the herd ran violently. And War of the Jews, Josephus says, and like the wildest of beasts, they rushed upon the point of other swords. So some of them were destroyed. And then, right again in the next passage, down the herd drowned, down the steep place into the lake and drowned, from Luke 8:33. And then from War of the Jews, book 4, chapter 9, Gadara and paragraph 503, Gadara and Gerasa, and that one version has and others two demoniacs, and that the demoniac tale foresees both rebel leaders. This is a different parallel. I believe I'm missing something here. I'm missing the actual occurrence of what happens. The herd drowned. So the Jews who were filled with, I guess that is from the same place on Lake Galilee, Sea of Galilee, that the Jews all drowned in the water after being infected by the demon of John. And has one and others two demoniacs, that the demoniac tale foresees both rebel leaders, John, who battled the Romans around Gadara, and Simon, called Simon of Gerasa. And that comes out to later parallels where they show how John and Simon mirror John and Simon, the apostles. The apostle called John, the one that Jesus loved, and Simon Peter, who Jesus predicts that John is going to be taken away, and that Simon is going to be executed. And the same thing is predicted for and happens to John and Simon, the Jewish rebels. So basically, to sum up this incident at Gadara, both Jesus and Titus encounter a legion of demons inside one man, and then the legion of demons is basically taken out of the one man and fills thousands, which caused them to run wildly, and 2,000 drown, which is the number that Josephus gives. I'm missing that passage. I'll try to find it. Sorry about that. But there is a passage where the Jewish, obviously the Jews are being compared to swine here as well, which is particularly, odious, as they don't eat swine. And so the 2,000 drown at Gadara. A legion possessed with a wicked spirit coming from one man. 2,000 of the demons, at Gadara, 2,000 of the demons do not drown. Okay, that's the difference, is that the 2,000 of the Jewish demons do not drown. They are captured and taken to Rome to be executed. Okay. Now, the next one seems I've got a little bit of glitch here in my notes, but the passage in Luke says, he said to them, this is Luke 9, verse 18, he said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered and said, "The Christ of God." In Matthew, it says, "the Son of the living God." And then if you go to War of the Jews, Book 4, Chapter 10, Vespasian had not arrived at the government without divine providence, but a righteous kind of fate had brought the empire under his power. Josephus recorded in another passage that Vespasian's ascension has been the fulfillment of the Jews' messianic prophecies. Quote, "What did the most to induce the Jews to start this war was an ambiguous oracle that was also found in their sacred writings, how about that time one from their country should become governor of the habitable earth. The Jews took this prediction to belong to themselves in particular, and many of the wise men were thereby deceived in their determination. Now this oracle certainly denoted the dynasty of Vespasian, who was appointed emperor in Judea." And Suetonius and Tacitus, also Roman agents, also gave that same interpretation, that this oracle certainly denoted the dynasty of Vespasian. It was a Jewish oracle. The Jews took this prediction to belong to themselves, but the Jew Josephus says, now this oracle certainly denoted the dynasty of Vespasian, who was appointed emperor in Judea. Okay, Atwell calls this next one binding and loosening. In Matthew, it is in the same passage and follows an identification of the Son of the living God that we just talked about in Luke. Luke chapter 9, verse 18. And who do you say I am? Peter answered and said, the Christ of God. In Matthew, it says the Son of the living God. Now, when we go to this is from Matthew chapter 16. So they said, some say John the Baptist, some Elijah. And this is the answer to the question that that Jesus is asking Peter. So they say, some say John the Baptist, some Elijah, others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered and said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Then Jesus answered and said, "And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." And so those are the key words there, binding and loosening. Now we go to War of the Jews, Book 4, Chapter 10, paragraph 628. "O Father, it is but just that the scandal of a prisoner should be taken off Josephus." Josephus is writing the history, but in some cases he's participating in the history also, because he's one of the generals, or at least military commanders fighting for the Jewish side before he surrendered and defected. So, "O Father, it is but just that the scandal of a prisoner should be taken off Josephus." Okay, so that's his binding and his loosening, together with his iron chain. For if we do not barely loose his bonds, but cut them to pieces, he will be like a man that had never been bound at all. Okay, now the next one is a little bit lengthy, so we're going to stop it right there for today. Again, some of the parallels are very strong, some of them are weak, but they're all there. They're there. You can see them if you're looking for them. In many cases, you can see them without having to look for them. For example, all of the old people who incorporated Josephus into their Bible up until the Middle Ages, and now still the preterists today, they incorporate Josephus into the Bible because the prophecies that Jesus articulates in the Gospels and in Revelation are fulfilled in the history written by Josephus. And so they, 2,000 years ago or 1,800 years ago, whatever, they noticed this. So I'm not making it up. There are entire sects that are founded because they believed in Jesus, because the prophecies, his prophecies were fulfilled literally by Josephus. But when you find out that Josephus is a Roman agent, then, and the Gospels and Josephus were written at the same time, then you call that into question. Okay, thanks for tuning in today.